Hello, everyone. You're looking at a really sad orphaned little gosling. This little gosling was orphaned on the substructure of a bridge in downtown Saskatoon. She's calling for her mother. You can't really hear her over the wind, but from where I was sitting, she certainly was calling for mom. You can see that she's on a substructure of a bridge a good 20 feet above the South Saskatchewan River. Over the next 37 minutes, you're going to see a condensed version of the 3 hours I spent with this orphan gosling watching her adventure as she tried to find a family to adopt her. A few hours earlier in the day, I had been watching a family of goslings with my wife when a passing cyclist told us that there were 3 goslings on the Broadway Bridge. I knew exactly where he meant because I had seen that mother nesting many times. In late afternoon, I went to the Broadway Bridge hoping to see if the goslings had made the big jump. When I got there was only one gosling left, and there was no sign of the family anywhere nearby. It was obvious to me fairly quickly what had happened. Obviously, the rest of the goslings in this hatch found the bravery to jump off of the bridge into the water. It actually doesn't hurt them to jump from that high, it happens quite commonly. But obviously, this little gosling did not have the courage, and eventually, the family left without her. I'm going to spoil the ending by telling you that the video does have a happy ending, but I want to warn you that a few times during the video, you're going to see some very sad scenes. Often this gosling has trouble finding a family, but also there's a few instances where she's attacked by adults, and it actually isn't pretty to watch, but I wanted to tell the whole story, so I hope you won't find it too sad. You'll see that an adult goose joined the gosling on the bridge. I'm certain this was not one of her parents because there was no family unit with goslings anywhere near the bridge at this time. There were certainly lots of pairs without goslings in the neighborhood, and different ones stopped to try to encourage this gosling to jump. This goose wasn't sure what to do, but the gosling went and sat in the middle of the bridge. She seemed interested in the adult, but wasn't sure what was to happen next. After quite some time, this goose lost patience and started pecking at the gosling, presumably to encourage it to get near the edge of the bridge. This gosling showed a mind of its own and found a little low spot and sat down and didn't move. Eventually, she got bored and after a bit of a struggle, worked her way back to the center of the bridge. Over the next little while, there was a lot of exchanges like this where the gosling would move around and the goose would try to encourage it to get near the edge. You'll now see that a second goose joins them on the bridge, and this goose was a little more aggressive in trying to encourage the gosling to get near the lip of the bridge. The goslin seemed undeterred and not interested in moving to the edge at this point. She occasionally shuffled away from this aggressive goose, but for the most part, she stood her ground. Eventually, she was near the lip. I really just wanted her to jump. I was hoping this goose would actually just nudge her and knock her over the edge. But unfortunately, that didn't happen yet. Obviously, I knew it was in this gosling's best interest to actually make the jump. She needs to get down on the shore where there's food, and eventually she would starve. By this time, I had been watching her for probably well over half an hour. I decided I was going to stick with it until she jumped, and if she hadn't jumped by dusk, I was going to try to figure out a way to find help because I was certain she wasn't going to survive the night. But I actually was just very hopeful that she would eventually jump because I had no idea what kind of help I could have found to rescue her from where she was. Eventually, one of the geese made a valiant effort to try to knock the gosling off of the bridge. I thought it had worked, but she gathered her feet and scurried off to the side. Eventually, this frustrated goose decided she had had enough and she left. The goslings seemed to realize she was alone when she came over the top of the bridge again, and she was crying furiously for an adult. You can't really hear her cries over the wind because I am quite far away videotaping at this point, but she was clearly in distress again. Quite some time later, one of the geese came back. I don't know if it was one of the ones that was already there. And the gosling wandered over right into the corner on the back of the bridge. Obviously, if she was going to jump, I was hoping she would do it on the side I was watching. But at this point, all I really cared was that she jumped. My vantage point is actually a little higher than the camera because I'm higher than my tripod. I could see that she was definitely thinking about it, and then all of a sudden she ran and jumped. And I knew she was gone, and I was so happy. The goose seemed to suddenly realize she was gone, and I think she was looking at her down in the water, and it looked like maybe the gosling was swimming off to the left. At this point now, I'm looking at the water at either end of the pier, hoping that the gosling will swim around one corner or another. Imagine my relief when I suddenly saw her swim around the corner. I panned over there, and there was another adult that had swum out to greet her. At this point, I was so happy because it looked like she had found an adult. Unfortunately, as you will see, it turned out that none of these adults was particularly interested in looking after a gosling. And as it turned out, this gosling's ordeal was just beginning. Not long after, the goose that had been on the bridge with her flew down and scared away another goose that was getting near the gosling. I thought this was a great sign and that it meant that this goose wanted to care for the gosling. The gosling saw what happened and swam out towards the goose, but she didn't stick around, and the gosling was left on her own at this moment. I have been watching the goslings in the riverbank the last couple of springs, and I had learned from reading and from other goose enthusiasts that it's very common in goose communities for goslings, especially ones who are orphaned, to simply be adopted by another pair of geese. My plan at this point was to stick with this gosling until I knew she had been adopted. There were lots of geese around, and I was very encouraged when this goose chased away another one that tried to get near the gosling. Again, I thought that was a sign that she would be interested in protecting this gosling. After a few minutes of being alone, this gosling went on shore and climbed on top of a rock. She sat down and tried to look as cute and helpless as can be, and started calling out again, hoping an adult would hear her. When a pair of Canada geese sat down on the shore not far away, she wandered over close to them and sat down. I think she was trying to be noticed. Eventually, this gosling snuck up and sat right behind one of the geese. They didn't seem to be bothered by her presence, so I was getting optimistic that maybe this pair of geese would accept her and look after her. You could probably tell from the audio that even though it was a warm day, it was getting very gusty. And as the evening came, I think this little gosling was pretty cold, and it looks like she just really wanted to snuggle up underneath this goose. My optimism that she had found a family was dealt a bit of a blow when the goose she was closest to got up and walked away without seeming to have any notice of the gosling. Undeterred, she approached the other of the goose pair, but as you can tell from his or her reaction, she wasn't particularly interested in having a gosling around either. At this point, her strategy appeared to be to look as cute as possible because, oh my goodness, I thought she looked cute. But any effort she made to get near this pair resulted in disappointment. She seemed convinced that this pair was the pair for her, and she kept trying to be near them and move closer and closer. After a few minutes, she tried to approach one of them again, but the goose kept backing away, and it was clear it was not particularly interested in having a gosling nearby. The other of the pair did not seem to mind the gosling being behind her, but she paid no attention to her, and I didn't see any sign that she was interested in the gosling at all. This stubborn little gosling did not take the hint very well. Every time this pair stopped moving, she walked up to them and tried to get them to accept her. But she continued to be met with indifference or sometimes aggression. This was her last attempt to attract this pair as parents. Shortly after this, they flew away and she was left alone on the shore. A few minutes later, she had worked her way over to the riverbank, and I had moved my tripod to try to get an angle of where she was between the rocks. Within a minute or so, she started working her way over the rocks towards where I was standing with my tripod. It certainly takes a lot of effort for a little gosling to get through this maze of rocks. You can see from the shadows that at this point she has now walked right underneath my tripod and where I'm standing. She got up on a rock and started calling for a parent. It felt like she was calling for me to help her. Obviously, it was very tempting at this point to want to help her in some way, but I really felt the best thing for her would be if she could be adopted by a goose family. I bent over just to take a couple of quick videos of this adorable little gosling. You can see that she's cold and scared, and oh my goodness, my heart was wrenching at this point.
Are you scared? Someone will come for you, okay?
At this point, she's finally close enough that you can hear her little cries over the wind. I knew that this gosling needed to hook up with a goose family, so after taking a short video, I moved my tripod further away so that she would go looking for a family. She started heading down towards the riverbank, although she did stop and look at me for a few seconds before she continued on her journey. I could see several pairs of geese coming that way, so I was hoping one of them would take an interest in this little gosling. She again tried her main strategy of sitting and looking as cute as possible. She sat where this pair of geese could see her. As you'll see, they weren't buying what she was selling. My heart broke a little every time a pair of geese rejected this gosling. I was thinking about this idea of geese adopting goslings, and it occurred to me that maybe that only works if it's a goose family that already has some goslings. Unfortunately, the only geese I could see in my sight line in either direction were just adult pairs of geese. I decided to wait a little longer and see if any of those pairs might take an interest in her, or perhaps a family would swim by that did have goslings and I could try to hook them up. A few minutes later, she presented herself to another pair of geese, but these ones paid very little attention and just sauntered by, leaving her sitting there trying to look as cute as possible. The next pair of geese that she tried to approach actually got aggressive with her, and when she got pecked aggressively a couple of times, I ran from my camera to try to scare those geese away from her. Unfortunately, when I turned my back to go back to my tripod, the little gosling persisted and swam after that pair despite their nastiness. At that point, she seemed to decide that taking to the water was her best way to try to approach a family of geese. She left that aggressive pair and swam downstream to where there was a couple other pairs of geese. She did approach both of those pairs, but unfortunately did not get a lot of luck in attracting their attention. When she started to approach this pair, it was looking promising as she intermingled with them, but unfortunately, my camera battery died right in the middle of filming her interaction with this couple. By the time I had swapped camera batteries, she was back on land. She spotted another pair of geese, and she scrambled down the bank to try to catch up to them. She swam around in the vicinity of these two geese for a while. They didn't seem particularly interested in her, but they also didn't seem particularly bothered by her being near, so I decided to just sit and watch and see how it played out. She bravely came closer to this pair. At one point, the one goose seems to be a little bit interested in her, but I can't tell if it's a good or bad interest. Unfortunately, it was not good interest. When this goose turned around and started pecking at the gosling, I stopped my camera and ran over to try to scare those geese off. Unfortunately, my plan had very negative consequences. The two geese were scared off and swam away, but the little gosling swam furiously behind them. I guess she had not been deterred by their pecking behavior. I caught up to them downstream, and it appeared the little gosling had caught up to them as well. I was hoping that they were comfortable with her presence, but before long they were swimming along again without any concern for her. It started to look like they were going to cross the river to the other side, and that worried me because I wanted to keep up with this gosling and make sure that she found a home. Fortunately, the geese turned back and came to the west bank, and the little gosling was not far behind them. I was very hopeful that they would accept her after this long ordeal. She had to be very exhausted. But it quickly became apparent that they did not want her around and aggressively attacked her again. At that point, I turned off my camera and decided I needed to intervene. I decided to wait until she was quite a ways from the bank because the last time I had went to get her, she swam away in the river and I made it worse. So when she got quite a ways from the bank, I tried to sneak up, but she immediately went to the river's edge. I held my breath and made a lunge for her, and thankfully I was able to catch her. As I had followed the geese downstream, I had noticed a family with 4 goslings not far from where we had ended up. I decided to release her in the water next to that family of goslings. When I approached, the geese swam quickly into the water. I dropped her in the water, and by the time I was able to focus my camera, she had already swam up and joined the group. You can see her bobbing behind there. I kept watching as this family swam away. The little gosling that had been orphaned was often swimming on her own or following one of the other adults, but she did her best to keep up with the group. I wanted to stick around and see how this played out because I wanted to make sure this family was going to accept her before I left her for the evening. It did seem encouraging as eventually she was floating around with all of the goslings. She left the water and came on the beach with the family. She was trailing behind a little bit, but was doing her best to keep up. They certainly did not seem to mind having her along. They didn't stay on the beach long before they headed back to the water. She was still trying to keep up with the group. When she was next to the other goslings, I could see that she was just a tiny bit smaller than them, maybe a day younger. It's hard to tell, but she definitely was a tiny bit smaller than they were. They headed back to the shore again, not more than 20 meters from where they had got back in the water. You can see as she climbs over the edge here that she is a tiny bit smaller than the others and did struggle more than the others to get up and over the ledge. But she got up there and joined them on shore. When they got on shore, the other 4 goslings and the 2 geese started eating. Our little gosling just sat down. She must have been exhausted from the last couple hours. I was just hoping she would start pecking and eating like the other goslings. Finally, she did start eating like the other goslings were. Eventually, Mama Gosling sat down, and I had a hunch she wanted the goslings to get underneath her and rest. I thought that if she would let this little gosling sleep underneath her, then for sure the gosling would be accepted and I would feel comfortable going home for the night. Unfortunately, I got a message that my camera card was full and my camera stopped working. By the time I switched memory cards, the 4 goslings that belonged to this mum were underneath her, and our little gosling was sitting by itself nearby. I had missed the action while I was switching memory cards, so I didn't know if the mom had refused to let her underneath or whether she simply didn't know she was supposed to go underneath. The male goose was blocking my view for a while, but it seemed like the little goose was trying to climb on top of her mom, so maybe she didn't know where she was supposed to be. She laid next to her to get out of the wind, and I just kept hoping she would find her way underneath. And lo and behold, eventually she went to the back, peeked underneath, and started crawling. And to my huge relief, the mom let her get underneath. For the next half hour, I sat on a rock and videotaped Mama sitting there as the goslings slept. I cut out most of it because it's not very exciting, but I shared this little clip simply because it was really cute when one of the goslings woke up and poked her head out from under the wing. I don't know if that was our gosling or not. I don't think it was. Eventually, Mama started to stir, and the goslings started to stir, and one by one, they sort of found their way out until all of them were out and went back to eating food. I think the last one out here is our little orphan. She didn't seem to be in a hurry to get back on with life, so she kind of hovered underneath the tail feathers for a bit, but eventually she wandered out as well. For the next little while, Mama just chilled while the 5 goslings went about pecking and eating a little bit. I was so thrilled that the little orphan was finally eating because she really hadn't eaten at all prior to this, other than a few little pecks along the way. So it was good that she figured out that there was food all around. Every time they moved a little bit, she seemed to be the last one to join in. I just think she was so tired that she didn't like moving, but they always seemed to call her and she always seemed to catch up. So it seemed pretty clear that they planned on looking after her at this point. I decided to follow them just for a few more minutes as they worked their way along the bank. You can see our little orphan is always a little bit behind, and in fact, Right here again, she just decided she was tired, and she sat down and had her own little rest while the others moved along. I started worrying a little bit that she wasn't going to join them, but the adults stopped and waited for her and called her, and very quickly she got up and hustled up to join them. You'll see here that it didn't take her long to scramble up the rocks to catch up. And by now it was obvious to me that the adults knew she was with them and were not planning on leaving her behind, because every time she got a little behind, they stopped and called for her, and she caught up. So this ordeal has come to a close and the video is about to end. It was very emotional, it was very exciting, it was very sad, but in the end it was very, very satisfying. And I'm really glad I was able to share this story with everyone. Take care.